This is a CBC podcast.
And with BC tapping all its resources, more than 200 wildfire fighters from Quebec have been deployed to this province to help out. Serge Paul-Jean is one of them, stationed in 100 Mile House.
Well, right now we're in a trend that blue skies in the morning and then the smoke picks up in the afternoon with the winds. Besides that, Mother Nature is also the main contributor. I can't pronounce myself on how the fire is going to react in the next few days.
But it's not done.
Oh no, it's not done.
No.
There's going to be a lot of work on that fire. It's not a sprint; it's a marathon. We don't know how many days. Like we might be here for 14 days, go back home, and then be called again. So it's fatigue management.
That is Serge Paul-Jean, one of the 200 wildfire fighters from Quebec who have been deployed to BC to help with those current blazes. And with high winds anticipated today, we could see some directional shifts and increased intensity in these current fires. Winds can reach up to 50 kilometers an hour around the southern interior, with the Southeast Fire Centre saying gusts could reach 70. To explain how these conditions could affect the behaviour of the fires, we're joined by wildland fire ecologist Robert Gray. Good of you to make some time for us this morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
Can you tell us about how these winds might influence fires' behaviour today?
Well, they feed a lot of oxygen to existing fires, and it speeds up the rate of spread, basically the rate that fire moves across the landscape. But they can also pick up and deposit burning embers, basically spot fires out ahead of existing fires. And sometimes that's in the order of 5 to 10 kilometers based on wind speed.
And so if you're planning on how to fight or control a fire, how do you anticipate those changes in wind patterns that might, as you say, carry some of those sparks?
Yeah, that's a great question. So whenever there's a forecast for these type of wind shifts and increase in wind direction, the tactic is typically to back off and just let that event play out and then move in afterward. It's just far too dangerous. Unfortunately, some of our larger mass casualty events on fires have been associated with frontal passage changes in wind direction and wind speed. So we tend to sort of back off and keep people at a safe distance.
And what about the topography of these regions? How does that influence the current fires?
Topography plays a very large role in basically where these fires funnel across the landscape. If you have a different, like a canyon feature or something, then the wind basically funnels down through those, and it picks up speed when it moves through them. Broad plateaus, you get kind of a single direction move, but you start to get into complex topography, and you'll see fires spread in all kinds of different directions. The fires along the Columbia Lake around Edgewood and Apple Grove, when you look at MODIS, the satellite system for detecting hot spots, you'll see that those fires spread in all different directions, north, south, east, west, and that's because of the effect of topography. The other thing is intense wildfires can also shift wind direction. They can pull the wind in a different direction toward the actual fire. So that's another influence on spread direction.
So I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. With those complicating factors, what immediate concerns do you have then with what we're seeing in the southeast in regards to that wind and what may transpire?
Well, basically, any value at risk that's in close proximity to these fires, whether they're, to the south of it or to the north of it, you have to consider that with these changing wind directions that, any of those values can be at risk. So, be prepared to move out. A lot of those areas have already been under evacuation alert, evacuation order. So you just have to be cognizant that even though the forecast is that there's a north wind which spreads fire to the south-southeast, you start to add in topography and existing, fire on the landscape, and those wind direction can shift anywhere 360 degrees.
And let's add in that third element, and that's the heat dome that we had last month. How is that likely to complicate the fire season?
It moved up the fire season significantly by a couple of weeks. We tend to rely on June as kind of a harbinger for what kind of fire season we're going to have. If we have a typically kind of wet June, we get the grass is green, the shrubs are green, and it basically prevents fires from occurring until things dry out in kind of mid-July. The heat dome dried things out immediately. And it wasn't just that it was a dry June. It was an exceptional event that dried all the fuels. So it cured the grass right away. It dried out the duff and the large logs, which typically aren't a contributor to fire behavior until mid-August. They all became available in June, and we saw that in that exceptional fire behavior. So it sped up the fire season, and it lengthened it by probably 30 days. So we're probably looking at a 90-day fire season this year.
With that in mind, what do you think needs to be changed to mitigate or reduce the aftermath of these wildfires in the province, since we know that they happen and are likely to happen with increased severity?
Yeah, that's a really good point. We're likely to see more events like 2017, 2018, and certainly what comes out of this year. A lot of research is going into what this landscape needs to look like for this future type of fire that we're looking at. And suggestions are that 40% of our landscape needs to be in vegetation that supports very short flame lengths. Grasslands, closed aspen patches, healthy riparian zones that are full of deciduous trees and shrubs, recently burned patches, open forests. And interestingly, that is the landscape that Indigenous people managed, for thousands of years. In that landscape, you had a lot of fires, but because of those smaller fires, you didn't have large fires. There were rare events when you did have large fires, but they were rare. Unlike today, when any fire that gets started has the probability of becoming a large fire because there's nothing to interrupt it unless it runs into a recently burned area, but there's not enough of those on the landscape. So our future landscape needs to be much more heterogeneous patches of vegetation that just doesn't support large destructive fires.
Very interesting to speak with you this morning, Robert. Thanks for joining me this morning and keeping your eye on the situation with us.
You're welcome.
That's Robert Gray, a wildland fire ecologist.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.